I'm William T. Nolan. I'm president of the InfraBK LLC, which is the development entity to establish the Infrastructure Bank for America. The Infrastructure Bank for America, or the IBA, will be a $1 trillion bank, infrastructure bank. We have legislation in Congress now to establish this bank. It is a bipartisan effort. You don't need to be a Democrat or Republican to understand the need for improved infrastructure in the United States. If you cannot get to work in the morning because the subway doesn't work or the buses aren't running, it doesn't matter what party your affiliation is, you need proper infrastructure. If you're driving along a road and you hit a pothole and blows out your tire, it doesn't matter what party you're in. If you don't have connectivity in rural America, that's not a Democrat or Republican issue. It's an issue of infrastructure. And our purposes at the IBA will be to provide the funding to correct those problems, to make sure you have connectivity in rural America, make sure that those subways are working properly and are properly funded, and that the pothole that you just ran over will be repaired. Infrastructure is the foundation of any economy. Without infrastructure, there is no economic activity. We are not government funded. All of the previous attempts to establish infrastructure banks in the United States have failed because they all rely on government funding. Given the condition of the United States government right now and its ability to raise additional debt, that is problematic. So we offer the solution, which is privately funded, not relying on the federal government. There are several other very successful enterprises that are GSEs established by the federal government, namely the Federal Home Loan Bank System, the American Federal Reserve System, and the Farm Credit System. And those are all GSEs established by the federal government for a public purpose. The public purpose for the IBA is infrastructure. That's very clear, for U.S. infrastructure. The Federal Home Loan Bank is privately owned, privately managed, and privately funded. And that is its great strength. It has established a dozen or so regional Federal Home Loan banks to lend to the mortgage brokers, mortgage companies, S&Ls, and local banks. The bank will be publicly owned by the American people, and a limited number of foreign investors can invest in the bank. There will be no controlling shareholders, no dominant individuals or institutions controlling the bank. We want as broad an ownership as possible. The bank will be established for the benefit of the American people, not for the benefit of the government, of the federal government, or anyone else. It's established for the benefit of the American people. The American people can own shares in the bank. The shareholders will vote for the directors, and the directors will come from a nomination process that is normal for a public company. We will have a public offering, an IPO, an initial public offering, and any eligible investors can buy shares in the bank. So our intent is to have a broad ownership, a deep ownership, and people and institutions who are committed to seeing successful revitalization of American infrastructure, and also who want to invest in a profitable enterprise. One of the major benefits of a $1 trillion infrastructure bank such as the IBA is that $1 trillion invested in U.S. infrastructure over the next 10 years will create 12 million direct jobs. The multiple of that is two to three times for indirect jobs and induced jobs. In the legislation, we have a 7% minimum requirement that the IBA will lend and invest 7% of our investable funds into rural America. All of the other proposals for national infrastructure banks do not have such a requirement. As we know, we have outsourced too much of our manufacturing, too much of our economic activity, including high-tech activity, to China. And most of that production that is done in China is based on U.S. technology. So what we must do is rebuild the foundation of the U.S. economy. The foundation of every economy is its infrastructure. You cannot have manufacturing unless you can get your product to market. You need a road, you need a bridge. You cannot have a telecommunication system unless you have a way to distribute that to the public. You cannot have an electrical system, a power system, unless the grid works and unless the grid is protected. All of that is now is vulnerable and below the standards being set by our international competitors. One of the interesting aspects of this is that the United States is the only developed country in the world, OECD country in the world, that does not have an infrastructure bank. You can look at China, and virtually all of their major banks are infrastructure banks because they make infrastructure loans, and they do so at the direction of the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party. So Europe has the European Investment Bank, which in effect is like an infrastructure bank, a wholesale bank that makes the types of loans that we'll be making. We all know the need for infrastructure is critical. It's long overdue, and it must be addressed immediately. That means now. And the Infrastructure Bank for America will be prepared to do that with $1 trillion at least over the next 8 to 10 years to address this serious issue. The need is bipartisan. The solution is bipartisan. We have the solution, and the solution is the Infrastructure Bank for America. We must act now to do that. Otherwise, the United States of America will continue to slide in international competition with China and others unless our economy is vibrant and strong. And so I encourage you to tell your congressmen, your representatives and senators, both at the federal government and at the state level, to approve legislation such as our bill to establish the Infrastructure Bank for America, so that we will be able to provide the trillions of dollars necessary to rebuild, reconstruct, and maintain U.S. infrastructure. Thank you very much.